Well, I want to welcome everybody to the July 7th meeting of the Finance and Risk Management Committee. This meeting will proceed as a teleconference meeting in compliance with waivers to certain provisions of the Brown Act provided for under Government Code Section 54953E1A in relation to the COVID-19 state of emergency and recommended social distancing measures. There'll be no location for in-person public attendance, and in compliance with the Brown Act, San Diego Community Power is providing alternatives to in-person public attendance for viewing, participating in the meeting, and we'll give instructions about how you can comment on the agenda items today. So with that, I'll call the roll. As I understand, Chair Humora is not going to be present today, but Mayor Denina?
Present.
And I am present, so our committee of 3 people has a quorum with 2 of us in attendance. We'll now go to non-agenda public comment and opportunities for the public to weigh in on items that are not on the agenda and are within the purview of San Diego Community Power. Kimberly, I believe we have some written comments.
Yes, we have 3. I will read those onto the record. Hello, my name is Joyce Lane, and I am a volunteer with San Diego 350. As I mentioned at the previous board meeting, many in the community are very concerned over the seemingly sudden departure of Cody Hooven after a new CEO joined, followed by a long period of silence from the organization and board. This is making community members question the overall health and stability of SDCP. As I am sure this committee is aware, Cody Hooven played an integral role in getting SDCP off the ground and was a trusted staff member. Since this committee is tasked with managing risk, does Ms. Hooven's sudden departure create any financial or legal risk? Thank you. The next one is, hello, my name is Rita Clement, and I am a resident of Chula Vista. We have seen the recent news about the issues with Orange County Power Authority, and prior to that, the collapse of Western Community Energy. And a common tie is their legal counsel, Best and Krieger, the same firm SDCP is using. Community members have recommended SDCP bring legal counsel in-house. Is there a risk for SDCP having BBK represent the organization? Number 3. Good afternoon, committee members. My name is Karina Gonzalez, and I am a Chula Vista resident. I understand that this committee's role is to manage finances and evaluate potential risks for SDCP in the future. Staff and this committee has done a great job in continuously evaluating the cost of energy, costs of procuring new sources of energy, etc. But I would like to make sure that this committee continues to ensure SDCP is on track to pay the $5 million in loans given by local citizens to get SDCP off of the ground more than 2 years ago. The community has become increasingly concerned over the sudden departure of the CEO, as well as headlines from Orange County Power Authority, and would like to be assured that SDCP remains stable and is on track with finances. And that is the agenda, or sorry, that is the extent of the written public comments.
Okay, and to confirm, is there anybody online or by phone that wants to comment?
I do not see any hands raised.
Okay, we can move on. And I should mention for those that may be watching, the agenda cover sheet tells you about how to participate either via Zoom or phone or by submitting a written comment that we will take into consideration. So with that, are there any items to be added, withdrawn, or reordered? I understand item 3 has been returned to staff. Any other changes?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay, not seeing any. We'll move forward to the first item on the agenda, Treasurer's Report for period ending 5/31/22. Is that you, Tim, or Dr. Washington?
Director LaCava, this is Eric Washington. So Tim and I will actually tag team this. We are happy to present to the Finance and Risk Management Committee the results year to date through our fiscal period ending May 30th, 2022. We are recommending that this committee advance this item to the board for ultimate approval to receive and file. So with that, next slide, Kimberly, and I will turn it over to Tim, our finance manager. Thanks, Tim.
Hi, Director LaCava and Director Dina. Tim Aguilar, finance manager. In regards to the Treasurer's Report for the results through May, The results are largely positive and are pretty much in line with our expectations. You'll see the net operating revenue came in at about 304 million, which is slightly under what we projected back in February when we did the budget amendment. Expenses also came in lower than what we projected at 290.4 million, which was also 4 percentage points lower than we projected in February. All that's to say the net position through May is still positive at $13.8 million. It's over what the budget projected back in February, so we have a positive $8.9 million through May. One of the things, just reaching back to the last board meeting where we discussed having a net position at the end of the fiscal year of $36 million, we still do think that we'll have that big net position at the end of the fiscal year, as we're expecting June revenue to be significantly higher as our rates change. Next slide, Kimberly. Getting to the pro forma, which was updated last month, which is our projection as of May. You'll see the pro forma projection is largely in line with the actual revenue and expenses. They're only slightly off by a percentage point. But I think the general point with the results through May is there are no surprises at all. Everything's in line, and everything's actually largely positive with a slightly higher net position at $13.8 million that we're projecting. Kimberly, next slide. With that said, Eric, feel free to chime in with anything that I might have missed. With that said, that concludes our remarks on the Treasurer's report from my end.
Oh, thanks, Tim. Thanks for making that presentation. And again, our recommendation is that we advance this forward to the board meeting for approval to receive and file the Treasurer's report year-to-date through our month ending May 30, 2022. So I'll turn it back over to you, Director.
Thank you. And thank you both for the presentation. Kimberly, is there anybody, member of the public?
No, there are no hands raised at this time.
Okay. Just a quick question. Can you remind me, Serge, you had your hand up.
Go ahead. I can go off you.
I was just going to say, what's the difference between comparing it to the budget versus the pro forma? Just as a reminder.
And I'll take this, and Tim, and feel free to chime in on anything that I missed. So essentially, Director LaCava, the pro forma is a projection that we review periodically just to kind of track how we're doing, how we compare our actual results to what the projections show. And for the most part, as Tim pointed out, it's been relatively positive. And then, of course, the budget is the same comparative analysis, but against the budget as opposed to the projection.
Okay, thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Mayor Dedina.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to thank, I'm always pleased to see what really to me has been a salient feature and value of this organization, that's careful and prudent financial and fiscal management. I really do appreciate that, Dr. Washington. It's very clear that I know you and your team have made that something to focus on, as well as support from the board. So thank you. And obviously with our new CEO, I think that it's only been strengthened. But I just wonder, you've weathered a startup organization during the worst economic and public health crisis in American history, and now we're going into a new recession, interest rates possibly going up again. So maybe just summarize if you think that will have any impact at all on this organization, or sort of rates that, power that we've purchased, or is that locked in? And do you see any other issues that we have to be aware of?
Thanks for that question, Director Dedina, and Karen, feel free to chime in. But for the most part, I'd like to be able to say that we are fully protected from the economic conditions. But the reality is there are some things that may potentially impact our operation. But again, through prudent fiscal management and really keeping a close eye on what's happening around us, as well as within our organization. And then I would add to that, with regard to the escalating energy costs, our hedging strategy has really placed us in a favorable position in terms of our approach to dollar cost averaging on the energy costs, being that we procured energy prior to the volatility in the current market, which has really benefited us from the standpoint of how we are able to weather this economic condition. But again, through sound leadership, through sound fiscal management, I believe that we're in a favorable and a strong position to continue along the trajectory that we have, thanks to our staff leadership, as well as support from our Finance and Risk Management Committee, as well as the Board of Directors.
Well, just one, no, thank you. And I just say one thing I learned during the pandemic, at least, first I run a small nonprofit that reminds me of the same thing. We have a lot less money, but very, very structured, very focused on keeping expenses and income similar, and, being able to pivot and adapt quickly when things are a little, the economy goes a little south, we need to cut back if we have to. But I learned that also during the pandemic with our city, which is a small agency. Again, it's only a $20 million budget for Imperial Beach, but I think your capacity and your team, the capacity to work with the board and obviously our CEO, to immediately advise us on when things look odd, or, make sure that's maybe challenging, and the ability to recommend a course of action quickly and not to wait. I think it's something, I know it's something you've already sort of institutionalized, but I think it just behooves all of us to be able to move quickly, because we're a small, nimble organization despite the large budget. So anyway, I know you know that, but it's not a restated it.
Thank you, Director Dedina.
Can I take that as a motion to move this staff recommendation?
Second, I can second that.
No, we'll have you do it. Let the
Oh,
chair.
I do the motion. Sorry. So moved.
I don't know if it makes that much difference. It gets us there, and I'll certainly second, and I'll also join in with the mayor's comments. Very much appreciated, and the fact that you do bring this forward every single month, I think really helps the board stay on top of the cash flow, and so I appreciate his comments. So with that, we'll go through the formality of calling for the vote. How do you vote, Mayor Dedina?
Aye. Dedina, yes.
I vote aye as well, so that passes 2-0. So thank you again for the presentation. So now we'll go on to item number 2, which is review and recommendation on budget policy. Who will be in that?
Again, Director LaCava, Tim and I are both tag team this policy. This policy we're bringing forward to the Finance and Risk Management Committee, recommending that this item be advanced to the Board of Directors for approval at the upcoming board meeting. Next slide, Kimberly. And Tim, I will pass it over to you at this point.
Yeah, so just real quick, in SCCP's Joint Powers Agreement, it's detailed, but there's some details I think that aren't as well fleshed out. So in section 7.3.1, one of the things that the JPA mentions is that the board will adopt fiscal management policies and would also include a deadline for budget approval. This hasn't been established yet, so that's one of the things that we're trying to do through this budget policy. Is one, establish a budget policy and set some controls, and then 2, establish an actual deadline for approval of the budget, which we haven't established yet, which Eric will get to in a little bit more detail on the next slide.
Next slide, Camilla. So essentially, we are, in a sense, sort of leading our sector with regard to developing a budget policy. Several of the existing CCAs have guidelines as opposed to actually adopting a policy. So as Tim pointed out, this budget policy will really lay out a predictable timeline in which we go through the process of establishing a budget. And there's a slide further in the deck that will be familiar to you for most part with regard to how we've programmed the development of our budget. So the budget will also facilitate transfers within various categories in the budget, up to a certain percentage for the level 2 category. And it gives that flexibility will allow our staff to really be flexible in terms of managing our overall day-to-day operations. And then it also gives us some flexibilities, albeit within the guise of guidance from the board, to transfer between categories up to 10%, but anything over that would be required to have board approval. And then also it gives us some flexibility with regard to supplemental revenue You may recall when we approved our amended budget from last year, we landed at a position that actually put our revenue higher than what we previously had programmed in the budget, which triggered the budget amendment, among other things. But then that would only allow the chief executive officer to have discretion over increasing that part of the budget from a revenue perspective, and not necessarily related to how that increase in revenue would get appropriated or reappropriated to the expense line items, which pretty much remain within the parameters that the board approved with the overarching budget. And then ultimately the goal is to make sure that we've got a policy in place that points us to achieving a balanced budget from one fiscal period to the next. Next slide, Kimberly. So this slide will be fairly familiar for the most part with regard to the timeline of the budget development, where we actually in the finance department, we initiate this process in January of each year, just to kind of start queuing everything up for engagement of the staff after we've developed some overarching parameters to the budget, frame the budget, mind you. And then we involve engagement from the staff at all levels, or at least at the department level, rolling forward to preview at the FRMC and the May board meeting, ultimately leading to the approval in June for implementation July 1st, which begins our fiscal reporting cycle. Next slide, Kimberly. And so I'll turn it over to Tim to kind of walk us through the example, but again, high level. Basically, transfers within categories would ultimately land at the budget level approved by the board at budget level 2, but it would provide, again, the flexibility for staff to move within those level 2 categories to reallocate funds, maintaining the total balance that was adopted and approved by the board. So Tim, would you walk us through this example?
Yeah, thanks, Eric. And again, Dr. LaCava, sorry, this is a really dense subject. So in regards to SCCP's budget, you'll recall both in our financial statements and the actual budget that was adopted, there are kind of 2 levels to our budget. There's the high level, what we call budget level 2. And then below that, there's a budget level 3 where things are broken out even further. And so this particular part of the policy, what we're trying to say here is within budget level 3 categories. So if you look at professional services as an example, that table on the right kind of shows you the subcategories within professional services. So the first part of this policy, essentially what we're trying to say is we want the flexibility to move within line items within that lower level budget 3 category. So in this example, there could be savings from data management. Let's say we got a discount from Calpine, which is one of our big data management vendors, for $2 million. Essentially what we're trying to say is with that $2 million, we want to have the flexibility to move that to technical support if we need the additional funding in that area. With the idea being it's a lower level category underneath a bigger level, so we can have some flexibility to move in terms of operational need should it arise.
And then if I could add that, for example, given this example, technical support might be that perhaps we engage a second forecasting consultant just to really validate the forecasts that are being developed on our behalf. And it also would protect us against a single point of data that may or may not be as reliable, and we would have a resource that we would be able to validate that against, and again, providing an extra level of support to make sure that our due diligence aligns with our objectives and allows us to maintain that fiscal responsibility and really get ahead of any unexpected changes, for example.
Yeah, and Eric, if I could add one more thing.
Sure.
So when the budget was adopted, the appropriation happened at this budget level 3 category, which means when the budget was adopted, we're pretty much set at what's in that FY23 budget column. So if we wanted to change and move, let's say $100,000 from data management to technical support, like we would technically need to take a budget amendment to the board. So one of the key things here is we don't think it's worth the board's time to consider a $1,000 or $100 change between line items. And so we want to have that staff flexibility to have those changes when we need it, and not burden the board with really small line item changes. That's the real intent behind this part of the policy.
And then just to reiterate, the actual approved level in this example, the total professional services budget would remain at the 16.9 million in this example, and still give us the flexibility that we would need to move between line items under this broader category. Next slide, Kimberly. Okay, so in this example gives us categoric transfer between level 2 line items that the chief executive officer would have to, again, give us the flexibility that we would need to react relatively efficiently in cases that might require a line item move and not have to burden the board with having to set aside a specific time to approve that specific line item adjustment. So Tim, I'll pass it back to you to walk us through this example as well.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. So with this example, so stepping back one level higher to budget level 2, what we're saying is when the board adopted our budget, you'll see the FY23 budget column. So that's kind of what we're calling the original budget. So that's like our point in time, number that we're going off of. And essentially what the policy is saying is we want the ability to move between those higher level budget level 2 categories by up to 10% of what the original budget was. So if you're looking at personnel, for example, we would have the ability to move no more than $800,000 either up or down from the personnel category. In this example, what we're saying is that we would take that $800,000 and move it to marketing and outreach for an equal amount. All I think is actually, I think we bolded the wrong thing. We would move it from that chart's messed up. We would move it from personnel to professional services at an equal amount, essentially saying that if there's a need in professional services, we would want the ability to move it between those two higher level categories. But anything above that $800,000 will require the approval of the board from there on out. If that makes sense. So again, the general idea here being we do purposely want to set a cap for what we can move. Essentially, that would be our big budgetary control. Because we don't want to give staff too much ability to move stuff around, and we still need to preserve the ability of the board for significant line item changes. But I think this gives us enough flexibility to move stuff around. And then the second thing I'll mention is there is precedent for this policy. Other city governments and counties do use a 10% figure like we're doing. We've seen it two ways, Eric and I. We've either seen it this way, where it's 10% in each kind of budget level 2 category, or we've seen it where things are managed at the big department and fund level, and departments can just move stuff around as they wish within their big department.
And to Tim's point, I think this gives us a level of higher granularity within the line items, as opposed to having an overarching sort of department level flexibility. Allowing us to be, transparent and again be efficient in terms of operating the day-to-day activities. Next slide, Kimberly. And so back to the supplemental revenue aspect of things. So this would give the chief executive officer the ability to allocate increases in revenue of no more than 10%. So if, for example, the budget called for the 716,000, looking at the gross ratepayer revenue line item, for example, if the revenue actually started to come in higher, then the CEO would have the flexibility to increase that line item in the budget by up to 10%. Any amount over that in terms of revenue the CEO and staff would present that to the board for approval and adoption under an amended budget scenario. However, with the expense aspect of that, that would remain the same in terms of 10% of the movement based on the original approved budget amount approved by the board. So that would then also contribute to an increase in our net position or net operating income in any given period by having those guardrails that would allow for a higher increase in revenue, yet holding fast or holding consistent with the 10% for the overarching category, that staff would have the flexibility to move expense amounts and line items amounts around.
Yep. And Eric, to add to that, the example that Eric and I are showing here, this is kind of the extreme example. That $70 million in this example, that's an actual real life example for fiscal year 23, essentially representing the maximum amount that this policy would give to the CEO. And kind of what Eric is mentioning, you'll see taking that $70.9 million under this policy, we don't have the ability to appropriate all of that for expenses because we would hit the 10% limit for each of those categories. And then the rest of the remaining would go to net income under this policy. And then one more thing, just to add a couple of case studies of where this would apply. In cities get grants, for example, where the CFO would have the authority to appropriate those grants, so that would be represented under this policy. Another example where this could apply is kind of Byron mentioned at the last board meeting, the PCIA, and kind of how that fluctuates, that could fluctuate revenue. Essentially, if energy costs are higher, for example, then revenue could be higher. So actually, it's opposite. If energy costs are higher, then revenue could be lower. So in cases like that, that's another place where we might need to exercise that authority, especially for energy or SCCP and CCAs, how they operate.
Thanks, Tim. Next slide, Kimberly. So again, we are bringing forward the policy, the budget policy with the recommendation to this body that we advance the budget policy to the board for review and ultimate approval of the budget policy. So with that, Chair LaCava, I will turn it back over to you.
Okay. Thank you both for the presentation. Appreciate you walking through it and in the backup material in the agenda packet. Kimberly, is there any members of the public that want to speak on this item?
There are no hands raised at this time.
Okay. What people really miss an opportunity to kind of jump in here with a quieter meeting. Well, I really regret that Director Committee Chair Homura is not here. Being a city manager, his insight would have been particularly valuable. I have a number of questions and concerns, but Mayor Dedina, you want to jump?
No, I agree. It would be interesting. I was thinking about this in terms of our own city policy. I actually like to see if I don't think we do this type of very clearly laid out budget policy, at least from my scene. So I appreciated that, but yeah, no questions or comments.
Okay. Well, I'll jump in. So Wei, thank you for bringing it forward. It is great to see as Community Power moves from a startup to a more stabilized operation, starting to figure out all those gaps, and certainly a budget policy so that everybody understands is, I think, very critical and important. So thank you for bringing this forward. And maybe I don't need to say this. I don't think of Karen as staff. I think of Karen as the CEO and a higher level, but I understand what you were saying, Jim. So I know where you were coming from. So I also did some review of mine, and probably would have been helpful if you could have actually identified specific organizations rather than refer to them in general, so that we have a good basis to compare. At the City of San Diego, we have no authority for the mayor or the chief operating officer to do anything of this scale at all. And in fact, there is actually no authorization to spend excess revenue if that should happen to come in over the course of the fiscal year. There is some very minor within individual city departments to be able to move a little bit of money around. But again, nothing of this scale. Now, the cities may not be the best analogy to this. We do have the San Diego Housing Commission, which is more similar because it is kind of this hybrid between government and nonprofit. It has pretty comparable budget, somewhere upwards of 500-600 million. And the authority that the executive director, the CEO has is 250,000. That's it. That's the only authority they have to make unilateral changes. There is always that delicate balance in a public organization between flexibility and accountability and transparency. And there's always, which one do you want? Which one is more important? And certainly our experience at the city was to really opt for much more accountability and using the hierarchy of the mayor and the city council to ensure that nothing goes off budget within very, very narrow limits. And so I'm not going to be comfortable supporting the budget policy. I understand what you're trying to do on here. I think the first example, well, let me also say the third example that you gave in terms of excess revenue, philosophically, I don't think there's any excess revenue until June 30th, right? Maybe you have an outlier of the federal government saying, hey, there's $50 million in COVID relief that you could actually count as excess revenue mid-year, but otherwise, not knowing the fluctuations, and maybe you can predict a little bit better with our organization, but I don't see any. I would be more interested in excess revenue going straight to our reserves until we build up our reserves to our predicted limit. In fact, I think that should be part of the budget policy, that anything in excess should be measured against where we are in meeting our reserve. And so 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now, when we hit those targets, it changes the conversation and you would maybe want to amend the policy. I think what was your first example where you have kind of the very lowest threshold within the level 2 line items within that, is probably something I could get a little more comfortable. Those dollar amounts are significantly less. We have a CEO because we have trust and respect in terms of her operations and decision-making. We've got a good executive team working with her. But I'm concerned there's too much flexibility. And I see it as the job of the board to watch this, that it really is our responsibility. So this is not a burden, even if you have to call a special meeting because some sort of unique moment comes up that you can't wait another 30 days, can't arrange a special meeting for whatever reason. But I see that as the responsibility of the board. So I'm a little bit open. I don't care if you wanted to weigh in on your thoughts. You're what, 2 months in now? What are you, 3? So still trying to understand. So.
Hi, Director LaCava. Sure, happy to weigh in. Can you go back to the policy, like the slide, Tim? Or Kimberly, can you advance it? Okay, there isn't a summary one on the different changes. I think to Eric's point, what we were trying to do is simply create some flexibility. I support the idea around having funds drop to reserves. So maybe there's a middle ground between now and the board meeting where we're balancing that, because yes, that isn't, a very important priority for us is that we build those reserves and we build that fiscal sustainability. Perhaps there's, I think what we've seen is that we're with a budget, we make a budget, and then life is what happens. And so we will see some of those changes. And so maybe there's a smaller threshold that you would be comfortable with, where we're not, again, calling unnecessary special meetings for small changes. If this level is higher than you're comfortable with, I think we can, maybe Tim and Eric, think about how to manage that a bit. We have a very strong reserves target. So we are definitely focused on that for sure. All eyes are there and getting to that level. And this is more of a, okay, there's going to be some changes here and there as we go. Nothing is ever as it started. And so just being able to be a little bit flexible will help us move quickly and adapt quickly. We talked about that too, but also not burden you with things that are not important. So perhaps the solution is, if there's a particular threshold, financial threshold, or some other level that would make you more comfortable, where we can still have the flexibility and adaptability and speed and agility, but at the same time, understanding that should we have some additional funds, we do want those to drop to reserves. So those are my two thoughts, and maybe thinking about how we balance those.
And Mayor, feel free to jump in.
Well, yeah, no, I guess I concur with you. It would have been nice to have Greg here, and when I look at the $70 million number, I still would concur with Director LaCava that we're probably going to be a little bit more prudent. I think the way our taxpayers, our constituents would see that as well. So I would definitely urge more prudence on how we do that, and lower, especially the last number. I think is it's definitely an issue.
I guess getting a little bit into the weeds, there is a difference between amending the budget and actually spending the money. And it looks like some of this money would actually have to be an amendment or a new contract. So if you have the authority to change a $1 million allocation to a $2 million allocation that is primarily spent to a third party, would the contract amendment have to come back to the board?
I can address that.
Yes.
So the currently SDCP has a delegated contract authority policy, which delegates to the CEO authority for contracts under, or I should say up to $125,000. Any contracts over $125,000 have to go to the board. And then there is also authority delegated to the CEO to make changes to existing contracts for up to 10% of the amount that is authorized by the board. So let's say if a contract was $125,000 and there was going to be a change in excess of 10%, that is something that would need to come back to the board.
So if the contract currently is $1 million, I guess that would still be the same. If they have a $2 million contract, let's get a bigger number. Would the 10% apply, or the 125?
Let me pull up the policy real quick, because I think there might be both limits. It might be the lower of the two, but let me double check that. I'll confirm.
So I guess, again, as always, my director of finance or the director of finance of the city always reminds us, it's one thing to do the allocation, the budget level, the authorization level, and then what you actually do with that money, or how you actually would expend that money, is then a separate conversation. And I will admit, our committee agendas and our council agendas are often full of these constant adjustments, because we require everything to be brought back. A lot of them are handled on consent because they are routine. And sometimes we do get agenda items that are both, we want to change the budget and we want to amend this contract. And it is tedious. I mean, there is no getting around that, but it is. And I'm sorry, Nick, you had.
I do. It is 10% of whatever the approved amount is. So it's not the lower of the two. So it is 10%. So on a $2 million contract, it would be authority to increase it back to $200,000.
Up to 200,000. Okay. So I like to say, I always like to get to yes and trying to figure out what the best is. There's, with all due respect to the wit and wisdom of Mayor Dedina and myself, we're only 2 out of the 7 board members. And so I wonder what their thoughts are, or if you wanted to try to reflect. I mean, there's not like a magic number for me. You know, if 10% is too much, is 8% better? Is 3% more in the range that's appropriate? Is there, and I assume we don't have any track record that suggests what kind of flexibility or dollar amounts we're looking for based on the past experience. I mean, those were such rapid growth periods.
Yes. So that's a great question, Director LaCava. So with respect to San Diego Community Power's history, no, we don't have that trend of information established at this point. Of course, as we continue to roll forward and mature as an organization, we'll have that data going forward. And as I mentioned in my opening remarks, that not a lot of CCAs, if any, actually have budget policies in place. I did a sample. I believe Tim also looked around at some CCAs, and I believe we had one of our consultants sort of do that work for us as well. And with direct contact that I have with some of the other chief financial officers at other more mature CCAs, they do not have policies. They essentially have guidelines which really speak to the budget development process, which we've also included in our policy. I wanted to put some parameters in place so that we've got, some guardrails that sort of guide us through not only the budget development process, but as well as the budget management process, and allow us some flexibility to be able to navigate within a rapidly moving and changing sector for the most part. I do support your suggestion and Karen's support of any excess revenue falling straight to reserves, to the extent that increase in revenue does not also come associated with increases in some various expense line items. We're having a percentage, again, whether that's 10% or 5% or whatever that number lands at, would give us the flexibility to adapt under those circumstances. But at the same time, make sure we have the guide rails and infrastructure in place to be transparent and to make sure that we're managing our fiscal operations appropriately and maintaining a level of transparency.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm trying to figure from the committee's action today. I think, I don't know, Mayor, what your feeling is. I think that trying to figure out how best to navigate this to respect your time and the value of having the budget policy. The timeline there is incredibly important. Having a policy that actually clarifies what flexibility there is important. I'm kind of inclined to, I don't know what kind of turnout we're going to have for our next board meeting, so that kind of weighs in as well. But to move this forward without a recommendation, and I can share a few thoughts that are on my mind without formally putting on it. Again, I don't know what the mayor's preference is. I would be more interested in giving flexibility within the level 2 line items, and no flexibility on the revenue excess, what appears to be excess revenue. As I said, I don't think that you have excess revenue until June 30th. Then you really know that you have that money, and not having that flexibility within all the line items in level 2, moving it from, as you said, from personnel to marketing, or which way, and as kind of a way to get a little more flexibility in there, and then realizing the board members have to weigh in. That's part of the job we signed up for. And then let this, policies are great because they can be easily changed by a majority of the board, and start at that level and then see how it goes going forward. That would be my suggestions, not a motion, just my suggestions, because I really want to hear in from the other 5 board members who may have much different experiences and may have arguments that, rather than have you spend a lot of time just because LaCava and Vadina have this idea, but to give the full board an opportunity to really weigh in. And then I think you hear some stuff from us that to the degree that you can fill out the agenda packet with some more detail. I realize, like you said, there's very limited landscape out there to compare to. But that might be helpful and informative to the board. So was that helpful?
Yes, yes. Thank you so much for that, Director LaCava. Karen, did you want to weigh in? I was just going to say thanks again for the feedback, Director LaCava. And I've got some things that we did hear your points, and we'll certainly take those into consideration and maybe make some adjustments to the policy. One proposal that I would have is we reduce the amount of the percentage amount of the delegated line item movement between the category 2 levels and not transfer between categories at level 2. For example, to use your example, from personnel to marketing and outreach, that would not be allowed in the budget, if I understood your remarks correctly. But we would have the flexibility to move items around in the level 3 category. And Kimberly, if you could roll back to slide number 11 for me, please. I think this is the example that shows this one right here, the table on the right. We would have that flexibility within the level 3 only, and not to move it around in the level 2 category. So that would be an adjustment I would propose that we would make, as well as maybe taking a look at reducing the percentage amount and maybe strip out or make a comment in the policy as it relates to excess revenues, to your point, Director LaCava, that if there are instances where there's excess revenue, that falls down to the reserves, or we can remove that part of the policy completely out, to the point that we can always revisit and revise as we roll forward.
Yeah.
So thanks for the feedback. And I'm sorry, Karen, did you have anything to add or comments?
Oh, I was just going to support that and suggest, if we wanted a little bit of flexibility in level 2 to lower the percentage, or even make a threshold number. So if we're comfortable at 150K or 250K or something like that, then it allows for a little bit of flexibility if we need it but it doesn't address, it doesn't cause major shifts.
Yeah.
So again, trying to keep that flexibility and combined with accountability.
Well, and thank you both. And that's why I didn't want to make a motion. I wanted to give you some room to get our feedback and then come back with a revised proposal and make your case in front of the full board. So, but yeah, okay. Mayor, any?
I would support that. Thanks. That sounds like a practical and realistic way of moving forward.
Okay. Unless there's any other thoughts, I'll go ahead and make a motion to move this without a recommendation to the full board.
So wait, are you making a motion or am I making a motion?
You can make the motion.
I'm still moved.
And I'll second that, and with the idea that you've taken a lot of input from us and look forward to this revised. So with that, Mayor, how do you vote?
Aye.
And I vote aye as well. So that passes 2-0. So thank you for this, and thank you for bringing the policy forward. I think it is really important for good governance, for Karen and the executive team to understand what flexibility they have and how to operate. The board to understand that as well as the public for that matter. So with that, are there any committee member announcements, or frankly, anybody who's on the call right here? Anything you want to add to the conversation for today? And not seeing any. Thank you, everybody. Hopefully I stepped up and was able to fulfill Chair Ramora's role here, and thank you all. And I think we are adjourned for the day.
Great. Thank you, guys.